All right, good afternoon, Chair Postman, members, Garrett, Vollendroff, staff, and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks, Dustin. We'll convene the executive management team meeting for Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. We're going to move around on the agenda a little bit, just given who's been able to make it. So our first staff update will be licensing from Becky Smith, the Licensing and Regulation Director. Good afternoon.
So good afternoon, Chair Postman and board members Vollendroff and Garrett. Before I get started about the licensing updates, I just want to share some information about some of the activities that BUILD, the Black United in Leadership and Diversity, will be doing to celebrate and recognize the historical contributions, culture, and great achievements of African Americans during the annual observance of Black History Month. During this month of February, that BUILD will be presenting a series of programs and events. That Black History Month's theme this year is Black Resistance, and it explores the resistance of African Americans in all forms against historical and ongoing oppression. The first event already kicked off, and that was last Thursday. It was a virtual lunch and learn event from 12 to 1, and that was on the history of Black culture and foods. The next event is actually tomorrow, again at noon, and it is a lunch and learn. That, again, virtual event, and it's around Black identity and Black radical tradition, and that's facilitated by Terrence McCall. And then the last event will take place, and it's a hybrid event, and so it's both virtual and in person, and that's on February 17th, and it will be from 2 to 5, and it's about Blacks United in Leadership and Diversity, and that's at the Evergreen State College, Tacoma branch. As you know, Tyrone Jordan Oliver is a chair of BUILD and a member of the licensing division. He's also going to be presenting next Tuesday at our division meeting. I invite any of you that would love to come and listen to his presentation and learn a little bit more about why we celebrate Black History Month. That certainly everybody's welcome. I also know that there are several events going on in people's communities and across the state of Washington, and I encourage staff and board members, the division directors and their staff to get involved and be active in the events happening in their community.
Great.
Questions?
Becky, you might want to remind the public who BUILD is.
Oh, I did. So BUILD is the Black United in Leadership and Diversity group. It is a leadership group that is for state employees. So any state employee can be involved in that group. And
Thanks, Becky. I missed it.
And we have somebody send me the invite for your division meeting.
Absolutely.
So I could sit in on that part if I could. If it works, great.
Absolutely,
Thank
we'll
you.
do that.
Becky, I would like to
So-
also.
Okay, we'll send you that invite.
Thank you.
I'll send it out to all of to everyone. I also wanted to mention that I provide you some updates around the social equity program. So the Department of Commerce is in contracts negotiations with their chosen facilitators. And once the contract is finalized, they'll work on an announcement with us to promote their kickoff event. That Commerce is also currently writing up contracts for 24 to 26 mentors for technical assistance for the mentoring program. And if you recall, the mentors have a broad range of experience in business development and cannabis business industry, both locally and also in other states and other jurisdictions. We'll be working with Commerce to ensure applicants will be able to easily sign up and access the mentor program when it becomes available. And then training and outreach, as you know, that the licensing and Make Green Go training videos are, they went live, that we continue to see individuals register for those courses. So we completed all of the 4 webinars, the one on January 24th and 28th. The licensing managers, myself, and others, and Make Green Go were available for questions and answers. After the webinar, we had a total of 365 people attend that event and 625 chat messages. This is considered high engagement for a virtual engagement model training event, and nearly all the feedback was positive. I think I've shared that before. And if folks are interested, applicants that missed the e-webinar, they could, of course, they're able to watch that and replay it. It'll be posted on our website. It'll be posted all the way through the end of March. And then we're also reviewing all of the questions that came in. And so we're going to put those and add them to our Q&A for our website. And I just want to thank Communications. They've been great partners in making sure that this has been successful. And so thank you, Brian, and your group. And then again, the disproportionately impacted, the DIA maps are online, that we did make some changes, as I shared in caucus on January 31st, that the maps were updated and they're live now. We've increased the number of census tracts that qualify as disproportionately impacted areas by increasing the threshold from 20% to 30%. That we are going to be sharing some more information, I believe, next Wednesday at the board meeting, and sharing what's also available when it comes to the DIA maps. And then I do want to share that we've also done some internal training. So it just doesn't stop at us doing our e-webinars with the community, but we also think it's important to share train our enforcement staff as well. So we did a training with our enforcement officers and our compliant consultants on January 23rd. And we covered the updates about the programs. We covered the DIA maps, and they submitted questions, asked questions, and we also shared where they could go to get more information if somebody reaches out to the enforcement staff. So on to customer service. I always like to report on special occasion licenses because it gives us an idea about where we're at from where we were in the pandemic times, pre-pandemic, and if we're almost back to what we were in pre-pandemic. So at this time in 2019, we were at 5,710 applications for that year. That we had received 358 applications in January, and this year we've already received 215. So again, it just shows that we're starting to see an increase in the number of applications coming in for those special occasion events that are happening in the community. And then I also want to share about an enforcement collaboration, and I'm sure that Director Wax will also be covering this, but that so many times we don't hear about all of the collaboration that's going on. And most recently, our customer service staff and our enforcement region 4, for their results presentation, they wanted to change the measures of expired licenses. So anybody that was expired over 30 days, over 60 days, down to 1%. They reached that goal, and I love to say we reached that goal, that we were really proud of the work that both divisions did, that customer service staff worked on correcting business licensing service errors. We processed discontinued business reports with the LEOs. We started tweaking any type of inconsistencies we had as well. At the end of 2022, we had 800 expired state liquor and cannabis licenses. We're currently down to around 400. That since the beginning of January, enforcement set in over 185 discontinued business reports, and the unit staff discontinued 222 licensees. 219 of those were liquor. 3 were cannabis, and the remainder was non-retail licenses. And almost all of these were just lingering expired licenses that now are off the books. They weren't operating, they weren't out there selling alcohol or selling cannabis. They were expired, and it was definitely, that it has a lot of benefits, not just to getting them out of our system, but preparing ourselves for the systems modernization project as well, to get them off our books. And then we have, Oh,
A
absolutely.
quick question on the cannabis side of licenses rather than liquor. This is something we've talked about on the board a little bit. So if there's somebody who, and we've seen a couple where people never really seem to get up and running, you know, they get a place, they get a license and nothing ever happens, they never move in. What is our method for, how do we get alerted to that? I assume, you know, if they're not paying taxes or they're not reporting any sales or anything, is there like a red flag that goes to you guys that says, hey, we're not hearing from these people?
No, there's not a red flag that goes to licensing that says we're not, that these folks aren't open and operating. Sometimes we hear from customers or other licensees that they're not open and operating, but if they're paying their fee and they're, that maybe they're a producer and they're not growing, but they still have all their cameras, they still have all of their, that they're meeting all of the requirements, we wouldn't necessarily hear from them.
Right.
But for those folks that aren't growing, as long as they're paying their fees and, like I said, keeping their cameras on, paying their, really abiding by their requirements to be licensed, we would continue to allow them to be licensed there.
Right,
I
'cause
don't
then
know if there's a hand of enforcement, and I will say that there may be something that enforcement checks on that we don't see on the examiner's side of it, but that's something that perhaps Director Wax could share.
Becky, I thought when it came to retail, there was a process, and at one time we knew everyone that wasn't open, and we were keeping in communication to make sure that there were legit reasoning.
Yes, so for that is different. So for cannabis retail, that we track everyone that's not open and operating. So
Right.
for that, Ollie, that's something that we track by sales. So
Right.
if they're not reporting sales, we hear about it right away, but that's for retail only. It's not for liquor. It's not for producer and processors. So a very small pool of folks.
Okay.
It just,
Jimmy?
yeah, it just seems like this would be an area, and I don't know if it fits into the systems modernization project or at all, but it would be great to have a process whereby we were communicating between the different divisions within the LCB, if in fact we're not, or if there's a process that we're more visible, so that we could track this and just know. And so maybe it's a process between finance, who's collecting, and enforcement, who's out in the field, and licensing, who's processing. It just seems like a really great opportunity for us to be able to pull that at any time if we can't now.
Yeah, so this
Sandra?
is something that, I'm sorry. This
Go
is
ahead.
something that licensing and enforcement look at together at the beginning of each month. They produce this list. It's not something that can always be at the top of our priority list. As you know, we have competing issues there's things going on that are trending in our industries. There's staffing concerns on both sides, but it's nice that our staff did work together and do essentially a target on this issue just to kind of get caught up post-COVID. But we do take a look at it every month, and we do give it some attention, but not necessarily to this detail.
Okay, great. Ollie, do you have another?
Well,
Go ahead.
I really hadn't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please, go ahead.
That's all right. But so Becky, on the ones that came back or just recently, if they are retail, do they add to the social equity pool?
They do but yes, so they would. So if for some
Okay.
reason they were discontinued, they would be added to the social equity pool.
Okay.
But I just want to reiterate that there was only 3 cannabis licenses that had expired licenses that we moved to discontinue. The rest were all liquor.
Great. All right.
That's
Rick's
supposed to be
got a
really
question. Hold on
short.
1 second. Sorry.
Hey, Mark, I saw that there's a bill being heard tomorrow. And it's Senate Bill 5377. And the first piece of that bill has to do with the board making those licenses available if people, producers specifically, aren't using their license or they're not
Right.
operating. So I'm just asking out loud with everybody here, Becky, how would that impact the current situation for us?
So we currently have, that we have quite a few discontinued producers already. It's not, it certainly would be, would go into the big pool, but we have over 200 and I hate to throw out a number because then it comes back to me, but I'm just going to say over 200 producer processors that we've received their license back either voluntarily or they've been revoked. Or they've never been open and operating. So we already received those back. For the other ones that are just out there and they're paying their fees and aren't growing anything, I don't know that the pool is that big to make a huge impact on the industry.
Yeah, this bill would require that the LCB suspend a cannabis producer license if no activity has been recorded on the license after July 1st, 2021, which is almost 2 years, and for the license to be reissued. So it sounds like we probably would not have issues with that, Becky, because you're saying as long as they're paying their annual fee as a producer, they can continue to hold that license. This bill would say anything after July 1st, 2021, if there's no activity, you have to give up the license.
Yeah, I would say that one of the concerns, and it's not around licensing, it certainly is over making people grow. It certainly would be a concern, I'm sure, to enforcement to have make somebody have to grow when they're really waiting for whatever. I mean, the industry to change, the business to change, for there to be other opportunities in order for them to grow, because we do have people out there, not very many of them, that are just sitting on their licenses but paying all of their fees.
And we don't have a shortage right now, so I'm not sure. I mean, it doesn't help the sort of supply issue because we got plenty of supply. We just don't have people lining up to take those licenses, right?
Correct.
So, yeah, okay.
So with that, I just have one last update, and that I'm just going to cut the other stuff out for now. As the cleanup is that I did want to share that we are doing also a cleanup in cannabis, that we're looking at all of our, we really are pushing, to get back to what we were doing pre-pandemic as far as processing time, 60 days to process a license for changes on the cannabis side. So anything over 90 days, we're looking into. We're trying to figure out what's been going on, and we're either moving those forward to the changes to happen right away, if they're ready to go, or asking them to wait and just like we do on the liquor side, come forward when you're ready to process that application. And so this will mean us changing some of our processes, and it's time for us to change some of our processes to what we do on the liquor side of things. So yeah. So
Great.
more to hear about that, I'm sure.
Okay.
And
Great.
that's it for me.
All right, seeing no questions, thank you, appreciate that. Let's go back to the top of the agenda, and Mark Webster is here for a ledge update.
Yes, thank you, Chair Postman. As I just gave a legislative update yesterday at the caucus meeting, I think this can be brief. We had a hearing in the House yesterday on the THC bill 1612. Justin did a great job on his testimony, and again, the Department of Health, I think, was really helpful in giving some supportive testimony, as they did in the Senate. Again, both the cannabis and hemp industries remain very concerned about the THC threshold that's in the bill, but they remain split on what to do with it. Hemp would like that threshold raised, while the 502 sector wants it dramatically reduced or even brought to zero. Of note, something that we're going to be taking a look at, the bill had a very, very high fiscal note from the State Patrol. So we're trying to dig in and figure out exactly what kind of workload assumptions went into that. So more to come on that, hopefully. We're still getting a number of questions and responding to legislators on a bill, one in the House, one in the Senate, that would prevent LCB officers from stopping a youth suspected of purchasing tobacco or vape products while underage. It would allow the compliance checks that we do, but not allow them to stop a youth coming out of a tobacco shop, let's just say. So we're working with the sponsor in the Senate, Senator Saldana, and on the House to try to clarify what our needs are, and making sure that we don't remove a tool to hold those stores accountable for their action. Not the youth, but making sure we're still able to cite stores who are selling to underage buyers. That's all I've got.
I don't know if you know this or maybe Justin remember, didn't we get a really high fiscal note last year on our THC bill from the patrol?
Yeah, this one's even higher.
Really? And it's less of, it's a narrower bill than it was, huh? Okay.
Yeah, that's a bit confusing because last year it was quite high. And when we worked with them over the summer and we bounced our language off of them, it seemed to we seemed to receive an indication that this would be easier to work with, and it would be potentially less work than they would have had last year. So we felt pretty comfortable at the end of the summer. So I'm not quite sure what has changed in those assumptions.
Okay. Well, hopefully we can work that out. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Enforcement and education. Director Wax, back to you.
Good afternoon and thank you. Dustin is gonna drive for me, so I'll say thank you in advance for him doing that and we'll get on our way. I put together some stats to share with you. I always start with the number of licensees that we're managing. We pull our licenses on a different date than licensing does, I think. So Director Smith's always like, well, that's not exactly what we have. But generally speaking, this gives us a frame of reference to look for as we look through the coming numbers. So our first slide after that has to do with complaints. And I pulled the number in advance. Board Chair Postman, 22 of our complaints for this month were internally generated and the rest were externally generated. This is just a look at the complaints by industry or by unit. And you can see that January being in the dark blue, tobacco and vapor were higher, and then cannabis and liquor were pretty much on par, with cannabis being dropped a little bit. When we look at what our complaints are related to, or the topics or categories of complaints, you can see that public safety is up to almost 60%. I like to see this number higher than the rest. That is our goal and our main focus, our main priority. We do regulate these industries and these licensees, but our main interest is also in ensuring public safety. So this is up a little bit, but not enough to make us wonder what's going on that's different. And this just happens to be the things that we're receiving complaints about, or the things that our staff are identifying when they're out in the field. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question about the are the complaints clustered in any way in geographically, or are these representative of the entire state, or where do the complaints?
These are representative of the entire state. Sometimes we will see not necessarily clustered geographically as often as we see topics that are trending in the industry. Lots of education while we were looking at retail robberies. During COVID, we did see some geographical complaints based on maybe sometimes political views about the mask mandates and different things that communities had going on. I don't regularly look at hotspots by locations. I do look at data by teams twice a year. We do our results reporting, and so I'll look at the different teams, and that will show me a location because our captains are separated by regions.
And do you bring that report when you do that to this meeting at that time that you actually do that, or is that just something you use internally?
That's just something, it's a report to me. It's it's our results. However, if you're interested in seeing that, we most certainly can invite you, or I could we could bring that
Just out of
show
curiosity
to the
more
board.
than anything, but yes, I would love to at some point.
Yeah, okay, great.
Thank
We'll
you.
get y'all invited to those. Thanks, Dustin, for pausing. This is our look at educations and violations. So you look over here on the left-hand side and you can see the education contacts for 2023. It certainly looks like we're low, but that's just 1 month out of the 12 that we have, or the 11 that we have ahead of us. So we're doing great work there. Then when we look at our AVNs, administrative violation notices, in the center are notice to corrects, and then our warnings, you can see that those are starting to show up on the board as well. It's a little tough to look at those in a 1 month shot against an entire year. I can tell you that the notice to correct tool continues to be a tool that our officers are using. I like that tool. It really documents our progression from education, conversation, working towards compliance, to saying, hey, you know, this is something that really needs to be corrected before we take that next step into enforcement. So that's been a widely used tool, and it's effective in documenting that communication as a more serious yet still education for our licensee. That's okay, Dustin, thanks. And this is just a look at education by quarter. Now, in the first quarter of 2023, Becky went ahead and stole my thunder with this, but you can see that our education is up. I won't repeat the stats to you, but they are fabulous. Our divisions partnered and did some great work getting out there and focusing on expired licenses and getting everything cleaned up at the beginning of the year and post-COVID. And we are really going to see that in our numbers. We did lots of contacts and lots of education with our licensees, so much so that you can see 1 month compared to 3 months is quite a substantial increase out there in the field. So I'm super proud of our staff for that. When we look at breaking down those education contacts by unit, again, you can see that liquor is up, but cannabis and tobacco and vapor are out there making contacts and being engaged as well. And when we start to look at just a comparison in the month, what you're seeing there, January in the blue, is certainly higher than the last 2 months. And you're really seeing a lot of those contacts that we're out there doing, specifically on expired license and other topics that are trending. And we'll break down the topics. We're going to look at some regulatory issues. You can see that we're out there contacting our licensees and doing some check-ins about youth access and public safety and licensing and permits. And then, of course, we're out there talking about making sure we're using CCRS correctly and getting current and active in that system. So we're still having those conversations. And that tends to be pretty consistent across all of the industries. Those topics. The violation breakdown, when we start to look at the separate industries, if we look over here on the right, you're going to see, again, that notice to correct tool being used very largely. Once we leave the education arena and we're not getting the compliance we need to see, then we're really heavily using that notice to correct tool, and then warnings and administrative violation notices when the others haven't been successful. And when we look over here on the left side, you can see in blue the warnings, and in the dark gray administrative violation notices. And we will break those down for you in the coming slides. When we look at notice to corrects, you're going to see those topics. These are the top 5. Advertising violations, floor plan and operating within the floor plan that they've identified, the surveillance system, CCRS, a misuse of license. And then on the next slide, you will see our administrative violation notices. And on the left side, we're seeing youth access and preventing these products being in the hands of our youth being our top priority. In fact, the top 5 categories for any AVNs that were issued. And then you see those broken down across the industry on the right. So
Can you
that's
go back one slide for a second? I'm sorry, before you go forward.
Mhm.
So did you say, the number, the 9 there is operating / floor plan? But then, did you say that, so what is that? What is included in that? I thought you were saying that includes surveillance and things, but those are separate items. So what does that mean, operating, like?
Well, I can specifically look up what those topics are. But they submit floor plans when they are approved for a license, and they are supposed to let us know when those change. For instance, when they're growing the area where they're going to be producing or processing the product, and when they change that, sometimes we show up and that looks totally different than they've informed us that it will. And there's rules and laws about how that has to be set up and separated. And
Right.
when they don't follow the proper procedures and processes, then we'll ask them to make that correction.
Okay.
And licensing can tell you more about what kinds of things they're required to tell them about. But they do have to submit floor plan changes and such.
Okay, thanks.
When we look at the things we're moving to warning about, you can see a lot of that has to do with the tobacco, the master sales agreement. There's that cannabinoid product issue, failure to post the required signs, and operating without a valid license. Again, these are just the top 5 topics out there for things we're giving warnings for. And then on the next slide, this is something that Enforcement and Education Division is really proud of, that we continue to, not just in the field, but also as we're resolving violations, continue to resolve things at the lowest level possible. So you can see here that many of these are resolved either uncontested or at informal hearing. And I think it's been since May of 2022 since we've had a cannabis case go to a formal hearing. So they're very proud of that internally.
That's great.
When we start to look at youth access in liquor, you can see our compliance rate in January was 79%. This is something we're keeping an eye on. We just recently started doing directed compliance checks instead of, it used to be the officers were selecting the places they would go. So they were going places oftentimes that they would hear about or see or know had more traffic. And so we're doing randomly selected places so that there's places who haven't had compliance checked in several years. So, and that's how the FDA unit does their compliance checks. So we're modeling that federal program, and we expected that it would impact our compliance rate just a little bit. And so overall, on average, it has gone down a bit. We haven't been doing it long enough to really say that for a fact, but we are watching those numbers. When we start looking at delivery and curbside, you can see that, and remember, anytime the numbers are this low, the data is really easily skewed, but we had 7 checks with a 72% compliance rate. So I believe out of 7, we had 2 sales, if the math there is right, but I think I forwarded some info on this. This month were just delivery checks. When we look at cannabis, youth access continues to be our highest rate, and that's a 96% compliance rate. The industry is doing a great job there. And then tobacco and vapor is in the 80% with 84 checks. Premise checks is just to look at how many times our officers are getting out there and having contacts with our licensees. You can see that they continue to do that work. We are at the beginning of the year again, so these numbers are lower than you saw last month anyway. And so we've been out to 4% of our tobacco vapor licensees, 19% of our cannabis licensees, and 12% of our liquor licensees. So they're really getting out there already for the month. This is another way in which we believe we can have an impact on youth access, and that's just that you get more of what you measure. And so we look closely at the other things we're doing proactively in addition to compliance checks, which is getting out there at locations and checking IDs. So in addition to those compliance checks, we've also been to over 50 or 60 locations just to check IDs out in the field when people look youthful and we're at a licensee establishment. This is our CRY unit. We're getting background checks. This is another thing we do in partnership with HR and licensing. This has to do with hiring. This has to do with issuing licenses. It also has to do with some of our officers' work in the field. But this is a great amount of work, and we have 2 employees in this unit, and they do all of our background checks for the whole agency. So super proud of the work they do. Examiner request, you'll see a new data point on this, and that is number of times that they went out into the field to support the officer's work and maybe compare what's going on, what we're seeing in CCRS and what we're actually seeing in the field. And then we'll hopefully start to see that number grow this year and watch and see how much they're engaging out in the field. Obviously, not alone, but as a support unit or personnel for the officers in the field. Our FDA unit, while a separate unit and not measured together with the tobacco vapor numbers, this is just an additional number of checks that's happening by contract out there in the state of Washington, 308 inspections and a 78% compliance rate for those additional compliance checks. And then IA, we committed to being transparent about this. We have no new complaints or internal affairs issues for the year. We still have 1 pending resolution from last year. And then hiring and recruiting, a big topic right now. We still have 34 vacancies. We do have 10 in background. We have hired 1 officer and 1 examiner since the last time we met last month. And we're doing lots of great things out there. They've started attending the hiring events, the physical tests at PST, and I forget the word that our recruiting team used when they described these events, but it's basically all of these officer candidates that want to get hired on at different places. And you have just a couple of minutes to give a spiel about your organization and kind of like speed dating, right? You're speed dating, but you're recruiting these people to hopefully apply for your agency too. So they're having some luck there. That's those 6 public safety testing events. And we got 90 additional applicants by doing that, and 60 of them actually passed. So that's a bonus. We're starting with a partnership with LinkedIn and looking at other ways to do things too, newspapers, websites, billboards, as you've seen, and just kind of measuring what our results are and seeing what works for us. As you can see there on the right, lots of great training happening. It's one of our priorities in the Enforcement Education Division is just to make sure that we're keeping up with ever-changing industry standards and professional training for our leaders too. And then finally, really quickly, I'd just like to share a couple of things with you. I was going to tell you about our expired license focus, but you've already heard great things about that. It was super good work by both of our teams. So thank you, Director Smith, for your partnership there. Right now, today, we're at the UW Tacoma campus attending a law enforcement expo, doing lots of recruiting. Just this week, I did a ton of recruiting in the breakfast line. I told all of the other division employees that enforcement was hiring. It was great. I had lots of great opportunities there. We're doing a lot of research and looking at other states and how they do recalls. just to make sure that should anything ever happen that threaten public safety in the state of Washington, that we're prepared with process and policy to make sure that we can handle that situation. And continuing to work with licensing on our DisBiz policy and procedure. We're working with policy and rules on canopy, next steps, what that looks like for our agency for the future. Expired license. Oh, the education program is going along great. As you see, we hired our education manager, Matt McCallum. So take an opportunity to congratulate him if you see him about. And we've posted positions for our ARA 4s, which will be supervisors that are compliance consultants. So some non-commissioned promotion opportunities within the division. And then we've also posted our education specialist position that will support that unit and work with communications to get the proper information out. So any questions for me?
I have
No,
no
just say-
questions, but
Oh, go ahead.
I do want to acknowledge the collaboration between Becky and your group, and just acknowledge that I really appreciate that and would love to see more of that, frankly. And I know that it's already happening, but I think that kind of cross collaboration between departments is really helpful. I'd love to see finance somehow involved at some point. I'm sure that there's ways to look at tax revenues. I mean, just that cross-departmental collaboration is really important and impressive. So thank you.
So really quickly, just so you know, Board Member Vollendroff, we actually have licensing folks that are housed at some of our enforcement regional offices, which is a great partnership. And finance does a great thing in that they measure partnership opportunities in their results presentation. So I'll hear a lot about our teams working together on investigations and on audits. So that does happen a lot. And maybe I can, based on your comments, take more of an opportunity to highlight those situations too.
That's what I was going to suggest, is let's take opportunity to highlight those things. I think it's important for the rest of the team to hear. I think it's important for the public to hear. So I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Board Chair.
I was just going to say, yesterday I was speaking to the chair of a tribe who had been visited by Matt and somebody else from your office. Unfortunately, I forgot that name. And just couldn't have been more impressed by the education presentation they got. They really just felt like it was super valuable. They didn't know it existed prior. And so that was good to hear. So pass that on to Matt. And I'm afraid I just can't remember who. Oh, okay. Yeah, Joe Bus. So
I think Marla, our new tribal manager, was also involved in that. So that was a super positive opportunity for us to partner with her also.
yeah, they were really pleased. So that was good to hear. So
thank you.
thank you.
Thanks,
Dustin.
Okay. Next up, Brian Smith for communications update.
Great. Thanks, Chair Postman, and good afternoon to members Garrett and Vollendroff. I just wanted to lead off with, you might have seen a Seattle Times article over the weekend that was, it came across as fairly negative regarding the social equity program. In essence, it was saying that it was a little, too late. And we had some issues with it. Namely, there's some inaccuracies that were in the story, but really the tone of the article didn't really reflect what we're seeing and what we've done. It gave kind of short shrift to the work of the agency in preparing for this, all the good work that the licensing division has done in particular. But I spoke with David about this, Chair Postman, about how we might be able to respond to it. And he and I agreed that I'd reach out to the reporter on that, as well as our editor, to talk about having a sit down meeting with both of them to sort of describe how we might be able to work together in the future. I mean, I'll tell you, I've been at this for 15 years here. The Seattle Times is the primary, historically is the primary newspaper to cover this type of issue in depth. And I've worked with some of these reporters, over the angles of our stories for many years, and have a really good relationship, open rapport between them. What was different about this one is that I've only been speaking with this reporter for a couple of months, but speaking is not the accurate term because it's always been over email. We'll get emails from her, which is a series of questions, and I'll respond to them with the help of maybe, you know, the licensing division or whoever I need to explain that, and always reaching out to them, offering, you know, the ability to be able to speak and kind of lay some context around this stuff. And so I was pretty surprised to see that this article would come out without any real discussion with me about what this means and what we've done and that kind of stuff. But I did speak with the reporter today after I sent her a message and offered up this meeting. She's corrected one inaccuracy that was in the story that'll be up there. You know, the horse is already out of the barn on this. But the bigger deal is that we're going to have this discussion with her editor next week, and that's a good opportunity to sort of to say how we might be able to, because we can certainly help this reporter and make people available. You know, here and you know, like Ollie's a great resource as well as others to help them flesh out their story and get the best story possible. And that's part of what my job is and what I'm always aiming to be able to do. But disappointed here, but I wanted you guys to know because I know there was a lot of people have been talking about it because a lot of people saw it. I look for these things, you know, and I know that I speak with a reporter. I want to see what comes out. I want to be the first person to be able to see it. So I look for it. I saw it early Saturday, but I wanted people to know here. I wanted you to know that there's work that goes on beyond outside of the front. Know that we're working on that.
Yeah, and I won't get into it too much, but you know, what was unfortunate about the story, you know, not even that it was negative. I think we all have been in this world of public service long enough to know that's what it is. And I was a reporter, like you don't write a lot of stories, hey, everything's going great. So that's not what we're looking for at the LCB. I don't think we have that expectation, particularly in this issue. I think we're well aware of the tensions that exist throughout the spectrum on this. I was really taken aback by a couple of things that I just want to mention since we brought it up. One was what I thought of like just a nihilistic approach. The theme of this story was some say it's too late to do anything. I mean, I get that it's late. Like, look, I mean, seriously, we're hundreds of years late for trying to take some of these steps that are finally the reckoning that's going on in America right now. So yeah, we all wish it, but to suggest that we shouldn't do anything because it's late, I don't buy into that. I think if that's how we viewed big problems in the world, we would really be in trouble. Interestingly, there's actually nobody in the story that says that. The reporter says it and paraphrases somebody saying it was rigged from the start. So that was a problem, and it all came from that point of view. And 3 years ago, the Seattle Times wrote a story about the lack of representation in the cannabis industry, and it was a column, and the headline was "How Black Business People Were Left Out of Washington's Green Gold Rush After Marijuana Was Legalized." Totally legitimate story to be had. 3 years later, we see this story, and the headline is "Why Some Say Washington Efforts to Diversify Pot Industry Are Not Enough." We know a lot of people say it's not enough. Not enough is different than too late, not worth doing. The problem is this world has not been static for 3 years. We've been doing a lot of work. You know, licensing has been, you know, this has been top priority. Ollie Garrett, of course, has served on the task force and internally making this a full-time job. I just wish the story would have said, people feel like they were left out. It was unfair. It's too late. And here's what the LCB says they're going to do to try to make it right. And then let people attack it. Let people say, well, it should have had this or it shouldn't do this. You know, some people don't think we should give points in our rubric for a criminal record. Fair debate. Let's have that debate. Some people don't like the way the DIA is. Go ahead. But where do we get to the point where we go, let us explore what they're doing and poke at that if you want, right? Like get into the details of that. It just wasn't any of that. And it was this narrative that also makes no distinction and confuses the role that a regulatory agency plays and the legislature plays. You know, in this story, there was not one legislator interviewed. There was only one person interviewed in this story who's even a potential applicant through our process, the same person who was quoted in their story 3 years ago. No mention of the nearly 400 people who attended our sessions to learn about it. So somebody out there doesn't believe it's too little, too late. They want to get into it. So I saw it Saturday morning too, and I kind of got obsessed with it. Go ahead, Ollie.
When I read it, I just looked at it and said, okay, somebody coming in fourth quarter, 2 seconds left, hasn't done any due diligence and kept moving. I never let it in. It was like, because it was very obvious whoever it was had not been really engaged in everything, the process, and talking to the folks that know what we've done. And I put no meaning on it and kept going.
I wish I had that ability. I will say that part of it is, my personal problem, of course, is I come from that world and I still feel an attachment to it, and I have defects that make me do it. But not everyone knows what we know about what we're doing. Even people within our own building here, they're not privy to the details of this and the work that's all gone on. And I don't want anybody outside of the group of us in leadership here to believe that that's the agency they work for. Luckily, it's not the agency they work for. It does not represent that. I don't want stakeholders to think that. I don't want potential job applicants to think that. And I don't want to overreact to one story, but there is just this unfortunate, we saw a TV story recently that was not unlike this in terms of its kind of narrow view of the story it was telling. I think we need to keep relying on Brian and his team to tell our story, to get out there. I think that this is an issue that's of such great import to us as an agency. I think, I don't want to create work for licensing, and I know Becky's already rolling her eyes at me, but sometime between now and when we open applications or something, we should have some all employee gathering where we can talk about this. And if we need to do it in an open meeting so all three of us can be there, because I think we all care about this, let's just do it. Let's just not react to the criticism, not react to the negative stories, but say, hey, people, we're about to launch one of the huge projects that this agency cares a great deal about, and we want to tell it to you directly and take your questions. And guess what? We're kind of proud of it. A lot of good work went into it, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. People are not going to like it. Some people won't like it. I don't know. I just don't want to.
And David, stop reading the stories. Okay. And I'm saying that.
Did my wife talk to you? Because that's what she said to me Saturday morning.
It's like, if you read it, it was so far not up to speed with where we are. I mean, Becky, with the new DIA and on, have we heard anything negative? And I'm just saying, David, don't put so much into that fourth quarter, 2 seconds left in the game story.
I hear you.
Let me share, Ollie, that we're so close to it. Some of us in the room and the people that are on this that know that there was a lot that wasn't said. But what's really bothersome was that the initiative didn't address social equity. There was no mention of that. The only thing that was mentioned is that we didn't do it.
Whoever, and I looked to see the name of the reporter, I'm going, whoever it was, I had never heard of the name, number one, but they were so far behind where we are today. That's all I saw. I mean, when you talk about being close to this and would have gotten roused up, it would have been me with all of this social equity and everything we've been doing. It was just something about that story that was like, okay, who is this that has just popped up and hasn't followed anything that's been done?
Yeah, I talked to David about it today, which is, I don't think our employees know that always. And they see the story, Ollie, and they think there's might be some truth to it. And so maybe an idea that we talked about that David just spoke of is, how do we let our own employees who raise the questions with us even hey, what about that story? They don't have a clue that it's false and bias. So I think the idea to think about how we do that, because the last time that story came out with Ollie, we got the same questions from a couple of staffers that, my gosh, it looks terrible. And I don't think, and I spent some time in a meeting trying to explain, it's not true, folks. Let me tell you what's really going on. So,
And I think
I
we
don't think
can
it's a
get
bad
away
idea to
from
do that.
reacting to the story, but
yeah,
you know, how have we communicated to our employees, number one, about what all we're doing here? And
Yeah.
I don't see it all, so maybe it's there. I mean, I know that you guys.
We've done multiple things and some that are right now, you know, with the agency newsletter
Yeah.
and all that stuff. But what you're talking about has merit, and if Becky is game for that, I can help work with her. We might be able to just have a.
we could do it
So
together.
I
mean,
believe-
it could be a webinar with employees.
I just
Yeah.
believe that before this launches, because I know there'll be people unhappy and people who don't get licenses who wish they would, and who knows what else. I'll just say for my, you know, I'm just incredibly proud of the work the staff has done under incredible stress. And I hate to even have to say it, but yeah, that doesn't mean I think it's perfect. I don't think that means it happened, you know, when it should have happened. I wish this had all been done differently 10 years ago, but it wasn't. And we were given the job of we took on the job of trying to do something about it. And we're doing it. And so I'm going to try to shut that stuff out. I guess, Ollie, you're telling me I shouldn't have spent my entire weekend fact checking that story. Next time I'll have to try to channel a little of that. But
Exactly.
But just to continue that, and I guess to wrap it up too,
thank you.
is just to say is that I take it very personally, in my role is to try and help that person understand what it is that they are writing so that they do it, so that we can avoid this kind of stuff in the future. You know, you can only do so much. We don't control that. I take it very personal, the stuff that I do. And I feel like I'm responsible for a bad article. I'm responsible for a bad news story that I do everything to try and prep them for. But going forward, just know that we're trying to address that. But some positives are coming out of it, which is where I was going to go outside of this newspaper story, is that, as you heard Becky say, is that communications has been working really closely with her team, excellent team that she has. And our communications plan is showing, you know, some real results that are really positive about this stuff. You know, one of the things at the start of the social equity program that I said that I wanted to be able to achieve with the communications is that no one comes and says, I didn't know anything about this, or you guys opened this window and no one ever told me, how am I able to do it? So our website, I told you at the last thing that November views on our social equity and cannabis section of our website was at the 31st out of about 400, 500 sites, which I said was good, apparently because this is a niche audience. In January, it jumped up to 11th.
All right.
So, you know, this is a specific audience that's looking for something specific, and you've got enough people in the thousands that are going to that page for that information.
Great.
And then you heard Becky say about all the people, the nearly 400 people that attended our webinars, which I sat in on one day's worth with that team. 28% of those people said that they learned about the webinars via our email messages and Gov Delivery. 32% learned about the webinars via our website.
Okay.
So they're going there. They're
Yeah.
going to the places which we've trying to drive them to get their information. 28% said they got it word of mouth, and 7% said they got it some other way. Now, we did some things that we hadn't done before in the communications for this, like advertising in some of these targeted publications. And I think that that's probably bearing some results there, because one of those publications, the Seattle Medium, actually reached out to us for a news story. They've never reached out to me on a news thing to be able to talk to. Becky did that interview, did an excellent job with that. And then later their publisher, Chris Bennett, called up and requested a radio interview for his show, which is the largest Black-owned news station in the Pacific Northwest. Ollie, I got word that you did something recently as well on that.
Yeah, I did 2 radio shows, one with conversion and I forgot Black something, and then the other with Eddie Rye. And all of these are in the community, and all of these are coming from where we were hearing before no advertising was done to get word into the community, and everything has been positive. I mean, on Eddie Rye's radio, if anybody's familiar with Eddie Rye, he
Yeah.
normally would just be in attack mode and saying, once they advertise and put who's going to be on their radio show, they get all of this feedback and stuff and people. And he did a little bit of, well, once people knew you were going to be on the show, I was hearing this, but it wasn't bad. And I actually got text messages afterwards thanking me and things. I acknowledge that we are where we are today with the help of the community telling us. So everything we've done has been based on listening to the community. And one of the things that I did, and Becky and I talked about it off record, was to give the story of where we started, how we heard from them, how we got to where we are, that we started out with putting all of that out there to where by the time the person that's doing the interview, they have no questions.
Right. Yeah.
They have no questions. I mean, on the first one I was on, she was just looking at her notes, and every question she asked me, I said, as I stated, because there was no questions.
Yeah,
And that was
that's
the
great.
way that's the way we've been doing them.
Yeah, good.
So that's excellent. Yeah, and very positive. So we should take that moment to reflect on that, as all these things that we're hearing are really positive stuff, despite what you might hear from, a
The
single
largest
person.
news organization in the Northwest.
There's that. We're working on that, Dave.
Okay.
All right, and then, but what that tells me overall is that we're hitting our target communities, which is sometimes hard to do with a target audience. I think we're achieving that, and it's good to hear all that stuff rounded out. Just to kind of wrap up some of that stuff, we issued the newsletters, which is something we do quarterly, one to the cannabis community and one to the alcohol-related stakeholders. We hit about, just so you know, we hit about 7,000 people will open those on the cannabis side of things. We cast a wide net, but hitting 7,000 people with the updates on the social equity and everything else that the divisions put forward, I think is an asset to one of the things that we produce in communications. That Tony, I'm sure, is going to talk about all the stuff that's going to happen on SMP. Julie is embedded on my team as the communications lead on all things and the work that she does with Tony, et cetera. And then lastly is that Sam Gooder on my team has just finished an in-training program I promoted her up to a communications consultant 4. So she's rounding out some of the technology things that we're doing, that she's got some real skills there. I gave her first kind of a media assignment the other day, kind of a low-level thing, but she also put out a press release regarding our security assessments and got a positive article on King 5 News, about that. So congratulations to Sam. Really glad I got a good team with that, and to have her recognize the maturity in the work that she's starting to generate as she's been around now and working with our team.
That's great. Yeah, good for her. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, policy update with Justin Nordhorn, the Director of Policy and External Affairs.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Bollendroff. I'll try to be brief because I know we're going to be pushing some time. So I won't try to cover a lot of the stuff that you heard in caucus on some of the rural projects, just to highlight some of the areas that we are touching base on is we're looking at some of the sampling issues. And so when we launch that, we're going to have a little bit different take. One of the things that I would like to do is reach out and have some more conversations with stakeholders before we start doing some internal meetings, as they're doing a number of things that we've heard in previous conversations with them that I think are worth exploring before we get any conversations started here. So we have a good baseline to kind of work from. We also have the pesticide evaluation work group going on, as well as the Cannabis Science Task Force. I think some folks had already heard about the Cannabis Science Task Force, really good meetings. Kathy's leading. Jeff is starting up the pesticide rule evaluation, and this is the first time we're doing a rule evaluation. And so we're still trying to work out a little bit of the bugs, but we had some good conversation, and I think that we're going to be able to set up some really robust input conversations. And I spoke with the Cannabis Alliance after the hearing yesterday, and number of different folks within the Cannabis Alliance. And it was interesting talking with one person who was a little bit frustrated on, okay, who do I talk to? Because of the topic that had to do with some of the rule implementation and a potential unintended consequence. So really good conversation there. And I was explaining that this is exactly what we're looking for in this particular debrief and evaluation on what did we accomplish and what else happened and what should we be looking at. And so I think that was a really positive contact, and we'll be exploring that a little bit further. Doing a lot of tribal outreach. Marla's doing a fantastic job so far, reaching out to different tribes. Really want to thank Becky for her staff, particularly Nicola, really collaborating with Marla on a number of things and downloading all the tribal MOA information. A lot of information she's gathering, as well as Becky's staff assisting her with some training on our current systems, so she can have access to the information. I mean, that's super helpful. So I can't thank you enough for that. We've got a number of issues with the bills this year that we're hearing about. I think we're getting a sense, and I know Mark probably talked to you a little bit about this, but I'll kind of share a perspective that when I'm hearing on the THC bill is not a full repeat of last year, but there are some folks sharing information that is just confusing what the bill does. And so I think that we're going to have to strategize on how to make sure that we have proper information to the members on how that is transpiring. We're hearing things about the bill allowing synthetics into the market. That's just not the case. We're hearing other types of approaches where a number of folks from the Hemp and Food Task Force are trying to work their recommendations from that task force into our bill, as it doesn't look like they're going to be presenting a bill this year. So that's kind of clouding some of the issues up as well. There's some representation around lab compliance, and this is not a lab compliance bill. And so it's definitely creating some confusion that I think I would like everybody to be aware of, that those things are occurring out there. We're also looking at bringing on a temporary project person to help Mary Sagawa out on the public health and outreach, to update our public-facing website for our public health education information. It's very outdated, so we are bringing that person on in the near future to help with that update. She comes from the public health arena to be able to help update all of that information, and it's very outdated. So I'm really happy that we're able to move forward in that particular area as well. Some work around the CANRA committees. So we've been participating in the hemp committee, particularly around trying to figure out from a national perspective what information would be valuable to share with Congress as they're deliberating on this year's hemp farm bill. And so not that we're trying to push something one way or another, but provide considerations from our experiences across the nation. We also had a good presentation today from the FDA walking through a lot of their processes so we could get a better understanding of how they approach regulation in a number of different areas. And so I think that was really helpful for the CANRA members to be able to see. And so we'll be having some more conversations and follow up on that, on how we may like to provide some input on where things could work well for the states. We also have some research going on right now around the bill associated with psilocybin. We weren't anticipating it coming our way, and nor should we necessarily anticipate that, but there were some discussions around, we have a traceability system, the CCRS, could it do some of these? And we had a really good conversation in our legislative meeting the other day that provided a good rounding of information on that. And so I think it's a bit more challenging than what some of the folks may have thought. and it's certainly not inexpensive, but we'll be still looking at that. We've reached out to Oregon. We're going to be having a meeting later this week with their healthcare authority, or their public health, who's taking on the psilocybin oversight in Oregon, so we can get an idea of what their anticipations and assumptions are on market structure, marketplace, how big is this, what is the demand, those types of things. So more to come on that. And then we also have the delivery bill. That was the other thing I wanted to touch base on. So we are still working with prime sponsors on that particular bill around they fully recognize the board is not in favor of the allowance provisions, but we are trying to provide information that if the legislature decides to move forward, what would be workable for the agency to be able to mitigate the risks as best as possible. So those conversations have happened. I'm not so sure that we'll see that bill move. But anything certainly can happen. We've seen that every year. So but we've walked through conversations with the third-party deliveries on their ideas of what they would like to see and our reservations around many of those ideas. And so we just were able to provide, with the facilitation of the prime sponsor in the House, the state's interest in what we are concerned about, and how this type of activity would create some risks in a number of different areas. And so having been able to share those interest points, then the industry has to think about, okay, is there any way we can alleviate some of these? And so I think that's what the representative is looking at right now with those stakeholders, is having those conversations. So we'll see kind of where that goes, but there's a lot of discussions occurring around some of these behind the scenes. And so wanted folks to be aware in case anybody reaches out and says, hey, have you heard about A, B, or C? So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll leave the update there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that. Tony Hood, Deputy Director for General Agency Update.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to start off with a quick kudos that we received after the breakfast. I think everyone knows that, because I mentioned this at caucus, we had an employee breakfast. All the directors participated in serving the staff. We had well over 100 people here. We had 130 RSVP, but I'm sure we had close to 120 here. And the email that I received afterwards, the email that I received afterwards says, in 22 years of state service, this agency shows more appreciation for its staff than any other.
Wow.
This morning's event shows how much employees are indeed appreciated with everything that's happened over the last few years, COVID, et cetera. The fact that people still feel appreciated goes a long way to show what a good place this is to work. So that was a nice follow-up email. And when I talked to people in the crowd, they seemed to be enjoying it. So that was great. And it was nice that all the directors got to serve people, but now I know, don't let Chandra talk to people from other divisions.
Because she's trying to steal them.
In her division. So we'll have to have ground rules, apparently. So the next item I have, I've mentioned in caucus, we have Laserfish go live on Monday. That is one part of the system modernization, the first small piece. And we've been doing training all week on different divisions. We received survey results from the enforcement group that did their training first, and I was very happy with those positive results. I shared those with the directors in case they were interested, and we'll get more survey results soon so we can see how licensing, what they thought about the training. Becky told me that she attended the training, which was great, and that inspired me to sign up for the training. So I'm going to also go to the training tomorrow afternoon and try to learn a little bit about Laserfish. So that's good. The last item I have was the LCB prevailed in the Brinkmeyer case yesterday. We all got a copy of that decision. That has been long awaited because of the fact that Mr. Brinkmeyer challenged the Washington state statute that requires cannabis license holders to be Washington residents. And so the good news is the U.S. District Court said that the Dormant Clause cannot be read to protect illegal interstate commerce. which makes logical sense. So they accepted our argument that it does not mean it's going to protect interstate commerce specifically related to cannabis. Mr. Brinkmeyer was an Idaho resident who wanted to invest in a Washington cannabis business, and he also wanted to potentially inherit it because the person was ill who owned it. He also made other arguments regarding equal protection and the privileges and immunities clause, none of which prevailed. And so we have some good language, even though the dormant clause was the big issue we were concerned about. We have some good language in this case if there are other challenges related to equal protection. So several of us gave kudos to the AG's office. It was Penny Allen as the lead, but as she said, it took a team to do this case, and she gave credit to her whole team. So this is very exciting. And that's all I have. I'm sure they'll be talking about it at camera, which is a nice segue.
That's right.
over
Yes.
to-
Yeah, the AGs did a great job on that case, and as we'll, I'm sure, talk, doesn't settle this issue nationwide. You know, it's going to be, and one of those attorneys said it could go to the US Supreme Court because you have these different decisions coming up, but
Right.
they did a great job. Yeah.
It's a great decision.
Yeah, it was really good to see. Thank you, Tony. And then finally, on our agenda, Director Rick Garza.
I'll bring the mic over here, Dalton, for you. Yeah, thanks to Kelly Roy from your office for helping organize the breakfast. I know Gretchen was upset she wasn't able to organize that this year. So I have a couple of documents that I provided you yesterday. I wanted to give kind of a CANRA update for you all. And we don't have to make any decisions today, but more just wanted to provide, while all board members are present and staff, kind of where we're at with the organization. And there's 3 documents. I'll start with the document that I provided you of the CANRA committees and the committee co-chairs. And that gives you an idea. There's about 13 different committees that are formed. And we have, and then the second handout is a list of the staff so that you're aware of at the LCB that are part of CANRA. And we have this platform, this app called Basecamp. And it's kind of what we use because obviously we're 42 states and we meet remotely, right? We meet on our services and computers. So this is a means for us to store files, information, we have webinars about once a month. You heard from Justin. There was one today with respect to the FDA asking CANRA and informing CANRA that finally they're ready to write regulations for CBD. It's been 3 years coming, just so you're aware. Justin, Kathy, and myself were in that meeting. I thought it was a really good meeting. They're looking for help from us. Yesterday, one of our committees, the Cannabinoid Hemp Committee, met to talk about providing Congress in the Farm Bill kind of the CANRA's position on how we think that hemp provision needs to be rewritten. So we're not going through the problems that we're all having with respect to what they did several years ago. I know, again, Justin and Kathy were on that call. I appreciate that. Justin, I think, and Kathy are probably the 2 folks on staff that tend to spend the most time. And why shouldn't they? They're our policy and our lead rules folks, so it makes perfect sense. But I also say there are 20 of our staff people that are also part of CANRA. And as part of Basecamp, they can go and use that. I know Jim, for example, and David, our chair, are part of that and in Basecamp. I just informed Ollie because I don't think Ollie knew that she could get in to that. So that's the means by which staff can use CANRA as a resource. And so I wanted you to see specifically all the staff that's involved in CANRA. There's also 7 other state agencies. There's 6 people in Department of Ag. There's folks at the Healthcare Authority, Department of Agriculture. Jim, you just provided the director at WISIP, the Public Policy Institute, who does periodic reports on the new cannabis law from time to time. So anyone that interacts in the cannabis regulation, and these are the agencies that I just spoke of, are able to be part of CANRA. And just so that you know, our state contribution from the LCB allows all other agencies that are interested. In fact, UW is a member, the city of Seattle is a member, just so you're aware. And that continues to grow over the last 2 years as folks who are involved in helping us want to be part of CANRA. And so I think we're looking at about 20 people within the agency, around another 13 from outside the agency. What's important that you have to be a regulating entity to have some kind of responsibility in order to be part of CANRA. And because we're the voting state, we determine whether people can come in to CANRA. They specifically come to me as the person that represents us at CANRA we have a monthly voting member meeting where we discuss, there's a large agenda, and I'd be happy to share it with you all too, if you'd like to see it. But that gives us, as the primary responsible regulating agency, the ability to determine who comes in to CANRA, because there's people that try to get in and they may be in conflict with us, to be honest with you, and they may not have a regulating authority. They just want to be part of it. And that's one way, honestly, of kind of, in another word, kind of regulating who's part of CANRA. Because it just is like in our state, in all the other states, there are people who struggle with the regulator and the industry, and they want to try to force policy through CANRA. And so I just wanted to share with you. Also, the last handout that I gave you was there are 2 meetings per year that CANRA holds. One is an external meeting and one is an internal meeting. And the internal meeting is what you are all part of this last, was it June?
Yeah.
June here at LCB, when we had all the states come forward and meet with us internally, and no one is invited to that meeting but the regulated states, the primary regulated states. And then we can allow different people in if we want. As we did, as the host, we were able to bring more people in. And of course, board member Vollendroff and Garrett were at the meeting in Tampa. You saw how that worked, that internal meeting. And the external meeting is one with all stakeholders. And I think CANRA in the beginning was very concerned about having others be part of CANRA. It wanted to be just an opportunity for regulators to meet together and share best practices and challenges and work on issues together. Yet there was enough people, including myself, who believe we've got to create some kind of forum with stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I don't just mean national trade associations. I'm talking about other federal agencies that are probably going to have some responsibility in regulating cannabis, just like the FDA discussion today. It can mean academic institutions that are involved. It can mean public health and prevention community. So one of the things that I sent to you, so you're aware of, is the actual agenda that was used at the external meeting, which was a couple of days before the internal meeting last June here. And it gives you an idea of the agenda that's put together and who it includes. And typically, one of the state members will moderate the panel, and then we will bring other people in to facilitate and really inform the regulators about areas. Like, I'll give you an example. The first meeting of the external meeting was Nicole Elliott, who's the director of the Cannabis Control Department in California for cannabis. And the panelists include Susan Wiss, who's a PhD research for NIDA. It included Brooke Hoots, who's the lead cannabis strategy unit for the CDC. It included Elizabeth Can, who's the administrator for TTB. Again, 3 federal agencies that likely will have some responsibility for regulating cannabis. And the overview of the panel was an overview of federal initiatives, priorities, and needs. And so that's kind of examples of where it's not just I want to stress, not just an industry-driven external meeting. It includes everyone that would have responsibility, including federal agencies. So it's about a 3-page, and it's really meaty as far as topics and areas, social equity, obviously. Many of the same topics that you'll see in the committees that CANRA has formed are the topics and areas that are covered in the external meeting. And many of you, including David, were here in June that may not have been in Tampa to see that that's really how the internal meeting with regulators is organized. So the external meeting will be in June of this year. The internal meeting will be in December, and exactly where and the timing will come. But I just kind of wanted you to be aware. And then those are the two meetings that occur each year. But it's important that you know that's not where most of the work is done. Most of the work is done in the committees that have been formed, and many of our staff are part of those committees. I know that Justin, you co-chaired one of the committees yourself. And so I give you the opportunity, both staff and our board members, to look closely at those committees. If you have an interest in either participating or co-chairing some of those committees, let us know, because that's, Jillian, to be honest with you, our director, she's just looking for volunteers. And oftentimes, who are the states that volunteer? The states that have the most experience: Colorado, Washington, Oregon, for the most part. And then, of course, New York, Massachusetts, Michigan. But it really is, it's a very valuable resource for us that until Canberra came, we struggled and had to rely upon one another to figure things out. But the idea in the discussion that we just had yesterday over the farm bill, and Justin and Kathy were present, it was an opportunity to spend an hour figuring out what do we agree we would want to be part of that provision in the hemp bill to turn this thing around so that it hasn't created the problems that we've all dealt with around the country related to that provision. So I thought it was a really good meeting. I thought they got some real valuable insight from all of you, including Justin and Kathy, about what needs to be included. And so I'll stop there, and Justin, anything you want to add?
No, that meeting yesterday was just the first of several to come. We're going to have another one in a couple weeks to continue that. And it was a lot of consensus building on, what do folks feel like would be the best approach, and then we'll vet that out further. So there's still quite a bit of work to do.
Right. So, this is something that Jim V brought up initially, and what we'll do. I think we should find a time at a caucus at some point soon to talk about this and see if there's particular committees that one of the others of us would like to volunteer for and try to engage in those ways. And I would just say, Rick and Justin and all who hear about those webinars and other things, if you hear of things that you think one of us might be interested in, just shoot us a note too, because I'm sure that at different times, one of the three of us would like to just sit in to listen to it. Some of those conversations are like, that'd be helpful. So.
Yeah, and remember that if you're part of Base Camp, you will get invitations to any of the webinars or discussions that the committees have.
Yeah,
you'll be inundated with that email.
No, but I had to turn off all of that. Yeah, so give us a heads up, because it's too much for me at least. So, okay. Thank you, Rick. Thank you all. Any questions, comments, or anything from board members? Seeing none. Okay, great. No, for me. Thank you all. Thanks to the team for the reports. Look forward to the next one. And have a good day, everybody. And we'll adjourn the executive management team meeting for February 8th. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.